Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Life Sciences Tutoring Sessions. It is lesson 4 on 4 September 2021. Today, we are going to be talking about these topics under the overarching section of evolution. So we're going to be talking about natural selection, punctuated equilibrium, and speciation. Starting off with something that I see can cause a lot of confusion, and sometimes students think they know the difference, but when they answer questions on what is speciation or how speciation has happened in a certain organism, then I can see that there's still some confusion between Lamarck and Darwin. So these two guys were some of the earliest, Lamarck before Darwin, some of the earliest scientists who looked at species, looked at their relatedness, and tried to explain how species are related, how species have changed, why they have changed. All of these questions came up in the minds of these two men. But there's some big differences between these two. On some of the big four differences, if we look at the origin of life that Lamarck has explained, so Lamarck has said it is permanent spontaneous generation, where Darwin said it's derived from an ancestral form. Now, this is explained a bit more in the driver for evolution. So, meaning, why is something evolving, and how evolution has, like, if you think about the driver, you think of what has caused or what has originated in this evolution. So Lamarck said it's complexification over time, and Darwin said it's natural selection. So basically, Darwin said certain organisms survive due to natural selection. They survive because the environment is basically letting them survive. They have got the traits, they've got the characteristics to survive in a certain environment. Where Lamarck said something different. He said complexification over time. So that just means that organisms are getting more and more things, more and more stuff, more and more characteristics, and that is letting them survive in all of these environments. Think of it as like you going on a walk and taking your GPS and your hat and your umbrella and everything you can, because you have no idea in what environment you're going to be and you want to be prepared for everything, and just like pull it out randomly. Now, the modifications, how these two guys explained how the common example in the textbook is how a giraffe got a long neck. Lamarck said it's because the giraffe internally decided, oh my word, look at those juicy leaves at the top of the tree. Let me start stretching. And the cells in the giraffe's neck noticed it needs to stretch. It made more and more neck cells, and the giraffe got a longer neck. Where Darwin said is these modifications that have arisen, this long neck that this giraffe has acquired, was just spontaneous. It was a random mutation that led to the offspring now having a longer neck, and that is advantageous. Now the giraffe can reach those juicy leaves. So the big difference is, think of you every single day of your life just wishing your superpower was being able to fly, and you just wish and wish and wish and think, and then all of a sudden you wake up one day with two little buds in your back, and you keep on wishing, and before you know it, within a year you have now grown wings because you thought of it, you thought it would help you survive, you will look cooler, you will find a better mate, all of that. So that is what this guy basically said. He said the organisms kind of notice, their cells notice they need something better to survive, and the cells start modifying, start mutating to get that in this generation. And that is not true. Okay, we have all figured out we wish to be thinner and smarter and have wings and have smaller toes. And unfortunately, our bodies do not react like that. Evolution and change doesn't work like that. Evolution and change works through spontaneous variations transmitted to the progeny. Progeny, fancy word for offspring. Okay. So what Darwin then guessed, and that is why we, well, Darwin, no, let's not say guess, let's say theorized, what he stated was that these modifications, these beautiful differences we see in all the organisms and all the animals and plants around us, was because of animals having random changes in their genes, mutations, and those changes sometimes leading to animal growing horns, animal developing black and white stripes, animal having more fat around them so they can survive in colder climates. And after that change happened, it was also just a random event that led them to be able to survive. So a gene mutated randomly to make the blubber that you find on whales or on seals. And all of a sudden, the guys or the seals with those mutations did survive. Okay, so this is the big differences. Let's just say, look at the last one, species extinction. So Lamarck said no species can ever go extinct except if humans kill them. And Darwin says, yes, it could happen naturally. And we know this one is true. Unfortunately, humans do lead to a lot of species going extinct, but we're not the only reason something could go extinct. It could be about other predators maybe migrating into an area and just killing all the new springbuck in the area for food, and that could lead to extinction. So there's lots and lots of examples. Natural disasters. Natural disasters have been happening for thousands of years. We've learned and heard in other subjects, maybe of the ice age, and we've heard of the meteorite striking the earth and changing the climate and conditions. So that all led to animals not being well suited for their environment. All of a sudden, the environment is super duper hot, but these animals cannot survive, and then they will unfortunately all die out and go extinct. So with that knowledge, let's look at some of the questions in this past paper. Question 1.1.2 states, variation within a species is introduced through. So now we have to think what causes variation. So variation is basically the differences. Why do we, when we look at the puppies being born from your two dogs, do they have different coat colors and they've got different, shaped heads or different eye colors, things like that. So yes, they're all puppies, yes, they're all dogs, but there's still variation within a species. When you go look at flowers and all the rosebuds coming up, sometimes you can see some produce larger petals or a bit redder petals or something like that. So that is the differences within a species. So let's look at them. A, random mating and asexual reproduction. So random mating could be one. Asexual reproduction, remember that is when a plant reproduces with itself, and that would just make another copy of itself. So it could not be A. B, mitosis and random fertilization. So random fertilization could be one. Anything random, if we see random, it equals variation. Just think about you choosing your significant other one day and then deciding to have babies. It is a random event that you have chosen whoever you have chosen to have children with. You could have chosen somebody very tall, and then the genes available to make those babies have like tall if you are short, tall and short genes. But if you are super tall and you choose somebody and they're also super tall, that is also a random event and could lead to then tall children instead of short children. So if random, it means there will be differences. There will be variation. Now, mitosis is wrong. Why is mitosis wrong? Because mitosis, if we think back to last week's lesson, the whole goal, the whole point of mitosis is to make exact copies of what we have. So we learned in grade 10 that our body needs to grow, our body needs to repair cells if there was injury, and your body then wants to make exactly the same of what it had. If there was an injury to the skin on your finger, your body wants to make more skin cells that can work like the ones worked before there was the injury. So mitosis makes exact replicas. So no, mitosis cannot lead to variation. Let's look at C, random mating and random fertilization. Yes, we see the both two random words, and we know random leads to variation. So C is looking like the winner, but let's just read D. D says mitosis and meiosis. Now we have learned this year that meiosis does lead to variation. There's two events happening in meiosis 1 that leads to variation. And if you think about those two events, they are super important to know. It is independent assortment and it is crossing over. So when going through your notes, remember that you need to look at why independent assortment and crossing over, when it happens and why it happens and why it's so amazing. Okay, again, mitosis can't be right. So our answer for 1.1.2 is C. 1.1.3, African apes and humans are similar, both have. Now, this we have just learned through looking and comparing all the different diagrams about all the different apes, African apes that we have learned. So let's just read through them all and see. Small jaws and well-developed brow ridges. We have learned that this is a difference between humans and African apes. We do not have well-developed brow ridges. B, opposable thumbs and bare fingertips. Now, this is our answer. We found it quickly. Both humans and African apes can use their thumbs. They're opposable, and they have bare fingertips. 1.1.4. The diagram below shows Tiktaalik rosea, a fish that may be the ancestor of the first organisms to live on land. According to Lamarck, let's just pause here. Remember, Lamarck's the guy that says it happens within a species. The species decides it wants to change, it changes, and the offspring then gets those changes. So according to Lamarck, this species of fish may have evolved the ability to walk on land by, let's see, A, undergoing natural genetic mutations, which caused the fins to develop into legs. It cannot be A, because these natural genetic mutations, they fit more into Darwinism. Okay. B, the process of natural selection. It cannot be that as well. Darwin said his whole theory is based on natural selection, meaning the environment is basically the thing that determines, basically the thing that chooses if a species is going to survive or not, because that species is either well adapted to live in that environment or not. Let's see, C, passing on the acquired characteristics of fins to their offspring. So that could be right, but let's read D and C, stretching its fins and using them for walking. That is definitely the one. So why is it D? Because we know what Lamarck said. It's happening due to use and disuse. It's happening because we are thinking and we are wishing and we are stretching our necks every single day. And one day we're going to wake up in our lifetime and have a super long neck so that we can eat that leaf. 1.1.7. Which one of the following scientists discovered fossils of Homo sapiens and Ardipithecus sp? So this is just theory that you need to know. And the answer here is Tim White. Okay, he was one of the big scientists who discovered these fossils of Homo sapiens and Ardipithecus sp. 1.1.9, punctuated equilibrium suggests the following. So let's just give a pause here. Now, punctuated equilibrium is a term that has come in, and it is here to explain the speed of evolution. It explains speed. So the people who developed and spoke about the theory of punctuated equilibrium did not say Darwin's whole theory of evolution is incorrect. They agreed with everything except that they thought it happened in a different time frame than what Darwin initially suggested. So punctuated equilibrium is a term that explains the speed at which evolution takes place. It involves where we have said that evolution involves long periods of time where species do not change or change gradually, known through natural selection. But then this very long periods of no change is alternated by short periods of rapid changes through natural selection. So think about it as like punctuated equilibrium. If you have somebody that keeps on irritating you and keeps on, and you're trying to keep peace, you're trying to have inner zen, and then all of a sudden you can't anymore and you just whack the guy. That is punctuated equilibrium. You've been equal, you've been meditating, you've been just chill, and then all of a sudden you snap and that's a punch. That compare that to thinking about evolution, where we say evolution is long periods of no change, and then that short period of a punch, that short period of a rapid change through natural selection. Okay, so they're saying species may then form in a short period of time if we talk about punctuated equilibrium. So let's read the options we can choose from now that we have a better idea of punctuated equilibrium. A, evolution is always slow and gradual. Here we can't say always. We've just learned that there is long periods of no change or a bit of a gradual change, and then short periods of lots of change. Natural selection does not explain evolution. No, this is not even correct in the least bit and has nothing to do with what punctuated equilibrium is saying. C, new species can appear quickly over a relatively short period of time. Ooh, that sounds like a good one. Let's read D. Artificial selection is the only mechanism that causes evolution. Again, this has nothing to do with what punctuated equilibrium is trying to explain. And D is in any way not even correct at all, because it's not the only mechanism that causes evolution. There's lots and lots of other mechanisms. So 1.1.9 is definitely C. 1.1.10. A group of students observed that the long-term use of antibiotics results in the decreased control of bacterial infections. From this observation, the students stated that antibiotic resistance in bacteria is caused by the long-term use of antibiotics. The statement is an. Why I included this question, because it has to do with antibiotic resistance. And you need to know that evolution in present times, one of the big examples of how things are evolving in present times, and even more related now than ever and more true now than ever, if we just look at the COVID virus, it is evolving, it is changing. Remember, evolution, the word evolution basically just says something is changing over time. Oh gosh, there we go. Change over time. So we can see sometimes the time is a short period, like with COVID. I mean, the new variants are coming out every few months. So these viruses are randomly mutating And sometimes that mutation is beneficial. If we look at, we have found alpha, beta, and delta variants of a virus, but only the delta one is actually now sticking around longer, has become more infectious, has become more dangerous. And why is that? All of them have evolved, all of them have changed over time, have randomly mutated to have a bit of a different characteristics in each one. But the delta one is basically the one that's surviving. Natural selection has selected that one to survive because its characteristics is better suited for its environment. Its characteristics, it's letting it transmit quicker, it's letting it evade some medications and things like that. So that is a good example of how evolution is happening in present times, how we can see these changes happening now, and why it's important to study evolution and to know and try and predict how things are going to change and how things are going to react. Okay, but let's just mix this in and just read the answer, read the question. So just wanting to know what this is. So this sentence, this statement is either a theory, an aim, hypothesis, or a conclusion. And this statement is a hypothesis. Okay, because the students made an observation, they haven't done any studies, they haven't done any research, they are just stating what they think the outcome or the reason is for this observation, and that is a hypothesis. Remember, a hypothesis is always a statement. So when you are asked to write a hypothesis, it needs to have a full stop at the end. And it is your guess at the outcome of the results. It is your guess for the reason of the results. Okay. So never ever write it in a question, and it can be wrong. It's totally okay if your hypothesis is proven wrong. If these students' hypothesis is proven wrong at the end, super okay. It was just the guess. Okay. 1.6. Scientists compare the number of differences in amino acids sequence to see how closely related species are. Fewer differences in the amino acid sequence mean the species are more closely related. Okay, and that makes sense logically. We didn't even have to have this first sentence or this first paragraph to know that. We know that the more genetic sequences, the more amino acid sequences that relate and that are the same, the closer related individuals are. That's how we look at paternity or maternity testing. If we want to see if somebody who's the child's father, we look at how closely the amino acid sequences overlap or relate. Now, cytochrome C is a protein that occurs in many species. Do not worry about this fancy word. It's just giving you the name of a protein. Don't ever let that freak you out because you can't remember learning about cytochrome C or a species in particular. We're just using this as an example. So now we know it's a protein. The amino acid sequence of this protein differs between species. The table below shows the number of differences in the amino acid sequence of 3 species, A, B, and C. 1.6.1, what type of evidence for evolution is being used in this table? Remember, we said there's quite a number of evidence for evolution. How can we really say that evolution is a theory that we are accepting in the current world, that lots of scientists are accepting, and there's lots and lots of different evidences. We have learned about fossil records. If we look at biogeography, meaning how organisms are distributed around the globe, how they are related, where they live. We can look at genetic records, and I think you can guess that it's the answer here. We are looking at genetics, and that is what we are doing when we look at genome sequencing or amino acid sequencing. Some other examples could be if you look at embryology, we look at how embryos relate and how we have seen that all embryos look that start out exactly the same, even though it's a fish or a cow or a human. So there's lots of different evidences that we can use to prove that the statement of the theory of evolution is correct. 1.6.2. Sorry, so I'm just highlighting the answer here was just genetic evidence. Those were just other examples I gave of more types. 1.6.2, give a letter of a species A, B, and C that should appear at positions 1, 2, and 3 in the diagram below. So how do we figure this out? So if we look at this table above, we can see, if we look at species A and species B, we see 11. And we have learned that this shows the number of differences. So the higher the number, the more differences. So between species A and species B, we have 11 differences. Between species A and species C, we have 3 differences. And between species B and species C, we have 10 differences. So if we just look at which species are most closely related, that is definitely A and C, because they have the least amount of differences between them. And if we look at this diagram below, this phylogenetic tree, the tree that shows the relatedness of species, we have learned that the longer the line, the more time has passed, okay? And the closer that these two organisms or species are connected, the last time they branched off from the tree, that shows the closer they are related. So we can guess that the ones that here, they have branched off the earliest, well, not the earliest, sorry, the most recently, is species 1 and 2. So they must be the most closely related. So definitely A and C. So your answer here is A, or you could have said C for 1 and A or C for 2. So for example, I'm just saying that if you wrote A for 1, you have to write C for 2. But if you wrote C for 1, you have to write A for 2. Basically, I'm saying A and C is for these guys. And then the one that is left is B. And we know that because it is distantly related to A and C. You can see there's a 10 and 11 in the amount of differences we see there. So that is how we worked that out. Question 3. So question 3.1 says describe the process of natural selection. Now this is for 7 marks. So let's try and fit it in here. So natural selection. I find it always ironic to say natural selection, but nature is not selecting. Nature is being. Nature has plants and trees and temperature and rainfall, and these organisms are either adapted to be able to survive in this environment or not. So basically the environment deals you the deck of cards and you have to say, oh my word, can I survive and can I bring my own cards to be able to play with this hand? So how natural selection works. So this has to do with understanding what Darwin said, how we base his theory of evolution and how we mix that in with natural selection. So what natural selection is saying is you have an environment that produces lots and lots of offspring. So you have a species in this environment that produces lots and lots of offspring. Here's all my offspring. And in this offspring, we can see that there's variation. If you just look at these beautiful bunnies that I drew, you can see that there's definitely changes and differences in their ear shape, ear size, and even in their head shape and size. So if you look at your family and maybe you have siblings, you can see that there's natural variation between you guys. If you don't have siblings, just look at your parents' siblings or your nieces or somebody that you know where there is variation in the offspring. That happens. We know that variation, those differences come in to play with how genetics work, how meiosis works. We have learned all of that. So we start saying that, yes, we acknowledge and we can see that there's variation in these offspring. So let's say in this environment with all the bunnies in it, that the predators are snakes and they are extremely silent and quiet and you can't really hear them. So the only bunnies that would be able to survive would be the ones that could hear their predator. And let's just say the best hearing comes with the biggest ears. Not always true, but let's say this is how these bunnies now work. So obviously, let's say this bunny, and this bunny and that bunny, they have bigger ears than the rest. They will survive because they can hear the snake approaching and they can actually run away. These guys won't hear the snake approaching, and unfortunately, the snake will have them for a nice snack. The only bunnies that now are left are the ones with the big ears. They have now survived. They will then reproduce between themselves. And because they are carrying the genes for big ears, they will give their offspring the genes for big ears. That means the amount of bunnies in the population with big ears would then therefore increase. And that is how this characteristic that helps an organism survive is passed on. Because the surviving organisms have a characteristic, they will mate and produce more offspring. So let's look at some of the key words that you must use when answering this question of how natural selection works. You might even be asked, you might even be given a specific example like these bunnies and then apply this question, these terms to that. So instead of just making a general, you'll just then insert the word bunny with big ears instead of favorable characteristics. So, but let's look at it. So the first thing we need to say is large amount of babies. So remember the first step, organisms produce large amount of babies. Another thing to explain natural selection, there is variation among these offspring. Third thing to say, there are favorable characteristics and some don't have the favorable characteristics. So some will survive and some will not. Fourth thing that we must mention is when there's a change in environment. So let's write here, change in environment. There will be competition between these offspring, that have a favorable or unfavorable characteristic. Only the ones with a favorable characteristic will survive. And then those organisms will reproduce. And obviously, they will then pass on favorable gene to the offspring. And then the next generation, lastly, will have a higher proportion of individuals with a favorable characteristic in the offspring. So I really like studying bio and telling my students to study bio with pictures. Use these pictures to help you. Draw these silly little pictures, draw these one-word summaries. So when you sit in the test, when you have to think about natural selection, you don't have to remember all those long sentences. Remember the keywords and then build your sentences around the keywords. Unfortunately, you cannot just draw what I drew here in your test. The examiner won't be able to mark or understand what you did. But if you always remind yourself, a smiley face means favorable characteristic, the sad face, the unfavorable characteristic. The arrow means increased. The little beautiful baby that you drew is just offspring. You will get to know it. You'll be able to understand and study it very easily, hopefully. And these are the main points. Now you can see that this question does count 7 marks, and I did list more than 7. So if you do forget some of the steps, as long as they are in the correct order and they do make sense, I mean, that's fine. Let's look at 3.2 now. Fossil evidence for humans may be interpreted in different ways. One possible model for human evolution is shown below. So here you can see what we can see on this graph, as we can see all of these different organism groups, the Australopithecus afarensis, Australopithecus africanus, and so forth. And this bottom line on our x-axis, we can see 4 million years ago, 3 million years ago, 2 million years ago, and present. So that means this is where we are today, and that obviously means back in time. 3.2.1, name the family to which all of the represented organisms belong. And this we have learned, the family is Hominidae. Describe how cultural evidence is used to support the theory of human evolution. So when we talk about cultural evidence, we talk about those practices for objects that we have passed on in our cultures, in the tribes, in the groups of hominidae living there, and how this has shown that these groups have evolved, how they have changed over time. So things that have to do with culture are things like tools, weapons, languages, artifacts, show advances, so change and advancing in human development. So here how you could answer this, so you can give any of the examples I use, but let's say if we look at artifacts, so even like pottery or anything like that, artifacts show, let's just say artifacts that are used, that were used, show advances in human development. .3.2.3, how long ago did the most recent common ancestor of Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis exist on Earth? So let's go look for those words. Here we can see Homo heidelbergensis and Homo erectus, and we're talking about the common ancestor. So common ancestor, the last time that they split off, and here we can find the common ancestor. So we have to find the line, follow the lines back to where the lines meet, and that shows a common ancestor, and that is 3 million years ago. Remember to just, for in case, always write the answer and, very importantly, the unit. So you guys are safe, so you know that you get most marks that you could get. 3.2.4, explain a possible reason why Homo ergaster was placed between A. afarensis and H. heidelbergensis on the model. So Homo ergaster, we have learned, shows characteristics of both of these organisms. So we have spoken about Homo heidelbergensis, they're asking, and A. afarensis. And now they're wanting to know why this guy, Homo ergaster, is between these ones. So here's the afarensis. And that is because it shows characteristics of both. So it shows that it has some characteristics from the previous hominidae, as well it is using those and developed those characteristics and changes, and it is also related to that one. So here our answer is Homo ergaster shows characteristics of both A. afarensis and H. heidelbergensis. Therefore, it is a very important word, transitional species. (3.2.5) Explain how the fossils of organisms that existed from 4 million years ago to present time are used to support the out of Africa hypothesis. So this is 3 marks. And what you need to say, obviously, when you talk about out of Africa, you need to mention a compulsory something about Africa. And obviously, it's the out of Africa hypothesis. So we are suggesting that certain of these ancestors originated in Africa. But let's see how we can say that. So, and they want you to refer to the 4 billion years ago to present, so all of them, to explain the out of Africa hypothesis. So you can start with saying things like the fossils of Australopithecus were only found in Africa, or the fossils of Homo habilis were only found in Africa. Or you could have referenced rather knowing that the oldest fossils of Homo erectus were found in Africa, or the oldest fossils we have of Homo sapiens were also found in Africa. And all of this suggests that the ancestors of Homo sapiens, so our ancestors of humans, originated in Africa. So a lot of the fossils that we have found, if we look at just the out of Africa hypothesis, were some of the oldest ones were only found in Africa. So that could really prove as evidence that everything and all Homo sapiens did start in Africa. And then our last one for today is question 3.4. Pottos and lemurs are small mammals. Scientists believe that the pottos and lemurs share a common ancestor that existed in Africa. Presently, pottos only occur in Africa, while lemurs are only found in Madagascar. Madagascar is an island of the east coast of Africa, as shown in the diagram below. 3.4.1. There was explain how continental drift could have affected the distribution of the common ancestor. So remember what we learned about continental drift. If we think long ago, we spoke about the word and the phenomenon Pangaea. That is when there was only one large continent, and all of the countries and things that we know now were connected in this one large continent. But because of tectonic plates and other natural events, these countries separated, these continents separated. And what could have happened is the common ancestor could have existed over this whole area. So if Madagascar moves, if we think back to when it was Pangaea, and Madagascar maybe fitted into the east coast of Africa like a puzzle piece, then these animals could have existed on this edge as well as on the Madagascan edge. And there could have been the continental drift where Madagascar drifted away, but it did carry the ancestors of these species on it. And then evolution would have happened independently on the east coast of Africa and on Madagascar. And because evolution happens independently with different areas, different natural characteristics that leads to a species either surviving or not, we will then see different species being able to survive from that common ancestor. So how we could answer this for 4 marks, you have to mention there was once one large continent. The common ancestor existed throughout this continent. When Madagascar separated, the common ancestor was found in both regions. So that is where your 4 marks comes from. Last question, 3.4.2. Describe a speciation of a pothos and lemurs to become different species. So this is just putting into words what I explained now. So what your marks, where your marks come from is you have to mention that the common ancestor became separated in the 2 groups by the ocean. So that is what we said here now, is we had a common ancestor that lived both in Madagascar. It still looked the same in Madagascar and east coast of Africa, but then there was no gene flow. So first you have to mention common ancestor, but then you have to say there was no gene flow, meaning that Madagascar species reproduced independently and mutated independently. These guys reproduced and mutated independently. Each group experienced different environmental conditions and underwent natural selection independently. So different conditions and natural selection independent. The individuals in each group became different. And to then led on to form the pothos and lemurs. So make sure that you apply the question in your answer. So you have to mention the continent, you have to talk about Madagascar, you have to talk about east coast of Africa, and then what we are actually talking about is the pothos and lemurs. Because you have to ask yourself, am I actually answering the question? I'm giving lots and lots of knowledge of natural selection and survival of the fittest, but did I answer the question, describe the speciation of pothos and lemurs? So I can't just answer this whole 6-mark question and not mention the pothos and lemurs at all anywhere. So make sure that you end off with the different individuals are formed, the pothos and lemurs. So that is where you got your marks from. So that is where the 6 marks came from. Okay, and that is the end for today. Thank you so much. I will see you guys next time. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Please just ignore that 1 O. It's just 2 O's. Scooby@africateamgeeks.co.za. Have a lovely weekend.